Okay.
Hi, everybody. Welcome and thank you for coming today. Most of you know my name is Carol Stern. I'm a librarian here at the GLEN COVE Public Library. Could you please keep yourselves muted during the discussion, and after we're finished, we'll open it up to questions to all of you guys if you have anything to ask or to say. I just want to tell you that August 11th, we're having Ellen Baker. She's been here before. She wrote her new book, Summerland Cove. So if you'd like to join for that, just sign up. Kate Quinn is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of historical fiction. A native of Southern California, she attended Boston University, where she earned a bachelor's and master's degree in classical voice. A lifelong history enthusiast, she is the author of the Empress of Rome series and 2 novels set during the Italian Renaissance before turning to the 20th century with best-selling works, The Alice Network, The Huntress, The Rose Code, which I all loved, The Diamond Eye, and her most recent, The Briar Club. Her books have been translated into multiple languages, and she lives in California with her husband and their 3 black rescue dogs. That's correct?
It's a little bit outdated, actually. I'm in Maryland now, and
oh, there you go. Oh, that's funny. It wasn't updated on the web page. Okay.
If it's on my web page, it's probably updated there. But
okay, maybe I was. Well, anyway, welcome, Kate. Where do you live in Maryland now?
I'm a little bit outside of Annapolis, and yeah, I move around a fair amount since my husband's active duty Navy.
Oh, yeah. So Kate is known for bringing remarkable women and overlooked stories to the history to life. Through her novels, she explores themes of courage, resilience, sacrifice, and the human cost of war, stories that continue to resonate with us today. So today we're going to discuss her book, The Diamond Eye, which is inspired by the true story of Mila, and I can never say this, Pavlichenko. She's a Ukrainian-born sniper who became one of the deadliest female snipers of World War II. So before we even start the interview, I found a YouTube online about a song being performed by Woody Guthrie, and it's about Mila. So I thought maybe you'd all want to watch a little clip of it. So go ahead, Marissa, and you could show it.
Woody Guthrie actually met Lyudmila Pavlichenko when she was on her goodwill tour to America, and he wrote this song inspired by her.
In the mountains and canyons, quiet as a deer, down in the forest, knowing no fear. Lift up your sight, down comes a Hun, 300 Nazis fell by your gun. Fell by your gun, fell by your gun, 300 Nazis fell by your gun. Fell by your gun, fell by your gun. This moment, 300 Nazis fell by your gun. In the hot summer's heat, or the cold winter's snow, all kinds of weather you track down the foe. Your face is as bright as the new morning sun, but more than 300 Nazis fell by your gun. Fell by your gun, fell by your gun. More than 300 Nazis fell by your gun. Fell by your gun, fell by your gun. More than 300 Nazis fell by your gun.
Okay. I hope everybody was able to see that.
$49 garden hose.
All right. Okay, let's go back to our questions. So tell us about how you became an author from an operatic singer.
Well, it was one of those things where I've been a writer really as long as I have, since about the age of 7 or 8. That was when I wrote my first story. I've been gravitating toward telling stories as soon as I was reading them. And so this writing stories, writing books was just something that I did on the side pretty much almost my whole life. So even as I was going to school for music, I was still writing on the side, and I was starting to query literary agents when I was in college. And pretty much I would write a book, and then I would query a lot of agents, and then they would all tell me no. And then I would I'd think, well, I better write a better book then. And I'd write another book, and I'd query another batch of agents, and then they would all tell me no. And this pretty much just kept going all the way through both of my college degrees that I got. And then I landed my first agent about a year or so after I graduated from grad school. So that was the story, at least, of how I got my start.
So what drew you to the genre of historical fiction?
Well, my mother was a librarian, but her degree was in ancient and medieval history. So I was always learning history in the sort of same fun, casual way that and absorbing it the way that fun, in the same sort of fun, casual way that other kids my age were, absorbing Saturday morning cartoons. So history was just something that I gravitated to because I loved it, because I was being taught it, when I was a kid, and I was really fascinated by various history, various points of history. Are we having trouble with audio? I'm seeing the chat on the side. Are you guys having trouble hearing me?
No.
No? Okay, well, just saw somebody was having trouble, so hope everything's going okay. But anyway, yeah, history was always sort of my first love. I read a lot of different genres, but historical fiction just seems to be where I tend to gravitate for the most part. I love stories of the past, and I love finding, little known women, especially of the past, and being able to shine a bit more of a light on them.
I love historical fiction too. It's my favorite. So how do you decide which figures of history to write about?
Generally, the point of inspiration for me is almost always going to be when I find a woman or a group of women who have done something truly, truly extraordinary. And when I do find a woman or women like that, and my jaw hits the ground, and I want to know more. I want to know more about them and about what they did. And, I start going down the rabbit hole, and I start thinking, well, how did I not know about this? How was I not taught this in school? And at some point there, I'll start to think this could be a hook that I could hang a story on. But that's almost always the way the point of inspiration from my books begins.
So how did you find Mila?
I actually found her when I was in the course of research for another book. And that book was my first book after the Alice Network, which was called The Huntress. And The Huntress is large part, it follows a group of Soviet women aviators known as the Night Witches. That was the all-female regiment of bomber pilots that flew against Hitler's Eastern Front. And the thing is that when you're doing research about one group of Soviet women war heroines, your research tends to start encompassing more of them. And so in the course of learning about the women of the Red Air Force, I also stumbled across a number of stories about the women of the Red Army. Chief among those, one of the biggest of the women war heroines of the Red Army was Lyudmila Pavlichenko, who also had the name Lady Death. And, as soon as I read about her, I was just gobsmacked. And I knew I didn't have room in the Huntress for her stories, but I tucked her in my back pocket and thought, I'm going to definitely write about her later. I ended up writing the Rose Code first, but then after that, I really ended up thinking, all right, I think it's time for Mila's story.
How long did it take you to write the book? And you wrote this during COVID?
Yes, I started this in late 2020, and I wrote it in 3.5 months flat, which is that is fast for me, very fast. I'm much more likely to take like 6 to 9 months to draft a book. This one happened quickly, I am convinced, because I was writing it late in 2021 and then late in 2020, early 21. And, that's when we had COVID, we had lockdown, we had the election, we had the election fallout, we had the insurrection. And I really think that my muse took one look at everything that was going on in my news feed and in the world around me and just said, I want to go somewhere more relaxing than this. How about the World War II Eastern Front? That sounds like a spa day. And my muse went head down into that book and just did not come out. So I'm convinced that that's the reason that book was written quite as quickly as it was, because I ended up turning it into my editor, and I was like, don't assume that I'm always going to be writing on this pace. This was, I think, a one-off.
So how did you do the research during COVID? I mean, there was so much detail in the book.
Well, I got lucky for this book because the chief bit of research the chief source that I had for this book was Lyudmila Pavlichenko's memoir. She wrote a memoir later in life, It was published after her death, and it was of course, published in Russian, but there's an excellent translation in English, and that really was the bedrock source for this book. And I had a number of other good books as well. Some good biographies of Eleanor Roosevelt. Fortunately, also Eleanor Roosevelt, her My Day columns have all been digitized, so I was able to find those online. The main thing I did find difficult for this was that I would have really liked to go to Washington, D.C. and actually be able to especially walk the ground of Rock Creek Park, which is this site of the big climactic scene in this book. So I could actually walk that ground. And I couldn't do that. I could not do that since no one was traveling anywhere in 2020. So, and I was in California at the time, so I was not nearby the way I am now. So for the climactic stuff for Rock Creek Park, I relied on a lot of different maps. I relied on Google Images and Google on the ground so that I could literally sort of place myself where I wanted to be. And I read a lot of park blogs about the park and so forth, so I could get a feel for what it was. But you do what you can when travel is not possible.
Have you ever been to Ukraine? Have you gone?
I never have. No, obviously I would like to, but again, this book came out, it was written during COVID, and then by the time things were reopening, the book literally came out only a couple of weeks after Ukraine was invaded. So yeah, I would love to see Ukraine, but the timing does not seem apt.
So how do you know when your research is enough and it's finally time to start writing your books? Like, how do you balance that?
It's generally the feeling of you'll start to get the itch that, okay, now I know enough now that I have comfort in the world that I'm trying to write. And that I feel is you get that when you have the daily life details. And it's not just the big picture timeline events and the big marquee events, it's the details of daily life. Those are the things that really make an era spring to life. So I feel like once I have a handle on those, and of course as well, I've done the research too, a lot of reading, and there's always some months of reading and researching and outlining that happen, before I even put a word on paper. So it is, so that's one of the, but at some point I'll start getting the itch. It's like, okay, I think it's time to start going now.
So your books really feature strong women. How come like a person like her we never knew about her? I mean, we went through school, we learned about, history, and she was I didn't know who this woman was.
Well,
it's
one of those things where, history tends to be written by the winners, and it tends to focus on the deeds of men, and let's be honest, also mostly white men. So if you're looking for stories that are not going to focus on that percentage of the population, you're going to need to start digging around the edges of history. And that's where you'll find the stories of amazing women and of people who are not necessarily white Europeans. As far as Mila goes, I mean, I think it's also one of those things where, she was a heroine, and she was, welcomed in this country when Russia was an ally. But then after that, very soon after that, once the war was over, Russia and the Soviet Union were the enemy. And so I think that's one of the reasons why, maybe the deeds of, a Ukrainian female sniper, who happened to work for the Soviet Union, didn't quite make it into the school textbooks, because for so long, the Soviet Union was the big bad, and their achievements and their contributions to our history probably would have been overlooked.
So Mila, she was a human being and both a hero. So her first role in life was as a mom and a father, I guess, at the same time. Her husband walked out on her. You talked about her dealing with an abusive man, like he didn't show up for the divorce hearing. He was very self-centered. Can you talk about them and how much is true with this story and how much is not true with this story?
We do know about her first marriage is that what we do know about it is that she was very young, and she described it as being kind of swept off her feet. She was barely 15 years old, I think, and she swept off her feet by a man at a dance and became pregnant, and they did marry, but he walked out on her and their son very soon after that. And so she was effectively a single mother from the age of about 16. And so she says, and someone asked, what book am I talking about? It's The Diamond Eye, which is the book that is in the background behind Carol there, or behind you on the bookshelf. So she does not say very much about her first husband, Alexei Pavlichenko. She says in her memoir just the bare facts about the background, and then she says one very telling thing, which is, fortunately, my son is nothing like his father. And when I read that, I just thought, whew, there is a story behind that word, fortunately, that she is not telling. She does not say anything more about him other than those few lines in the memoir, and she does not say what his fate was. Very likely, there's some indication he may have been a doctor. There's very likely he just simply went into the Red Army and died at some point during the war, like many millions of other Russian men. But since there was not a fate that was on the record for him, I decided to make him a bigger figure in this book, and he is a bigger figure. He crosses paths with her in any number of times in the course of this book. And I decided to do that because, since she does not tell us how he died or whether, what kind of relationship they had, I decided to, amp that up a little bit. And the reason, and I thought that would be valid because he clearly did have a presence in the real Lyudmila Pavlichenko's life. It's just that she didn't share it in her memoir. And I know why she didn't share it, because if you are a woman who led an extraordinary life and you've been asked to, write your life for posterity, how much page space are you going to give your deadbeat ex? You are not going to give him any, absolutely none. And, because he got enough page space in her life and he caused her enough headaches in her life, clearly. And so I decided, well, I get why she left him out. I would have left him out too. But I am going to have fun imagining maybe what that relationship could have looked like and giving him a bit more of a role, because it ended up being a fun arc for her that when we first see her, he's this huge presence in her life. He's a big problem. He's always causing her problems. And then she grows so much in stature and becomes so much bigger and more courageous than anything he can achieve, and so much more famous than anything he can achieve, that he ends up really just being a pebble in her shoe. And I had a lot of fun with creating that arc for her and knowing how much he would have hated it.
He would have. So each chapter starts with a quote from her actual memoir. Can you tell us which is official or unofficial? Like how much of it is there and not there?
Well, it's not necessarily a quote directly from her memoir. I decided to start with sort of like the idea of the official and unofficial, because the memoir itself is not without the stamp of Soviet propaganda. You can see the places where propaganda office, like literally rather heavy-handedly, has clamped down and is, saying something. And so I knew that using the book as a source was a delicate balance between finding the real facts in there and then finding the things maybe that either were left out or that were put in by the propaganda office for propaganda purposes. And like one example for that is that there is a mention in the memoir of a meeting that she had with Stalin before she goes to the United States. And I don't depict that in the book because I don't think it happened. And the reason for that is because the other members of the deputation also wrote about their time going to the United States. And neither of them mentions meeting Stalin beforehand. And they would have mentioned that. That would have been a huge, huge thing, a personal private meeting with the leader of the country. So they would have mentioned that if it had happened, and they didn't. Neither of them did. But it is mentioned in Mila's book. And I think the reason for that is because she was asked, because she was asked to write her memoir. I think the propaganda office said, "Oh, and can you please insert a flattering reference to the boss, please?" And she would have said what any Soviet citizen at the time would have said to a request from the propaganda office, which is, "Okay, will do." And so she wrote a nice little reverential scene where she got to meet Stalin and he gave her some good advice, like before she goes to America. She may have met him later once she was really a war heroine, but she didn't meet him at that point. But the memoir says she did. So that's just one example of how propaganda can put its stamp in Soviet writings. And so I wanted to play with that from the beginning by being able to give the reader the idea that, especially when you're living in a Soviet police state, what is on the record and what actually happened can be two very different things. And so I gave, and plus it gave me the opportunity to be able to play a little bit with the truth and with, with what is true and what is not in that way, because, really the Soviet mindset is so very, very different from anyone who grew up in a Western country. It's a really different mindset. And that was one of the ways I could get that across.
Yeah, it was interesting. So what parts of her personality or the story surprised you the most? Like what?
I think what surprised me the most about researching her is how the warmth and the humanity that she had, because that's something that really does shine through in the memoir, through the sort of bars of, the Soviet speak that pop out of her sometimes, is that she had a sense of humor, that, she had this warmth about her, that she had, that she was a nerd and a history geek who could absolutely geek out about, anthropology or about her classes, that she was a devoted daughter, that she was a good friend, that she passionately loved the men in her life. And it was one of those things where, I think people have an idea, a preconception about what a female sniper would have to be, and that they're going to have some vision in their minds of someone who is cold and controlled and icy, and some sort of Black Widow, reared in the frozen north kind of romanticized idea. And instead, what came out for me researching her was the humanity. And that's really the part that I enjoyed writing the most and that I wanted to bring out, was to show the warmth that this woman had and the good qualities, the softer qualities that she had, at the same time as also being a sniper, that it is possible to be both. And that was the thing I think that not only surprised but delighted me.
It's so surprising that she had 309 kills. It's really unbelievable that,
Yeah, I mean, that is a truly astounding tally, and and that's the thing that will make people have preconceptions about who's who and what she is. But at the same time, she was also, a human being. She was a daughter, she was a mother, she was a lover, she was a friend, she was a student, she wanted to be a historian, she was a history geek. And those are the things I found, really quite astounding about, that she was able to be all of those things at once.
And I guess I found it interesting in the book too that she kept getting wounded and coming back, and she kept coming back for more, doing more.
Yeah, she was wounded. In her memoir, I think she was wounded about 5 times. Now they were, for the most part, not bad wounds. She just kept coming back, but that was what it was. I mean, the casualty rates were so appalling on the Eastern Front that if you could hold a gun, you were going back. And so that was the kind of thing that, it's appalling to read about. But she really did say that, the way the conditions were, she fought in 2 brutal sieges. She called it her baptism of fire. It was a horrendous front and fight.
So I thought it was also interesting in the book, the relationship with Eleanor Rosenfeld, her friendship with her. How did you approach writing the scenes between the two of them?
Oh, that was the other part of what made her story so appealing to me, was that this very unexpected friendship. And that's the kind of thing where I wouldn't have dared make something like that up. I think if I had made it up, everybody would have been like, please, this would never happen in real life. Well, it did happen in real life, and just goes to show you that, life is stranger than fiction. But the thing that I loved about it was that I thought that these 2 women, what would they have in common? And I wondered, okay, what would this friendship look like? And I think you have to put that down to Eleanor, because the more I learned about Eleanor is that what a gift she had for friendship. She was continually in her life as a first lady and afterward, constantly, reaching out from this pedestal that she was on to the most unlikely people and nurturing these friendships. And that's a real gift that she had, because, she's a woman of immense privilege. She was born to money, to education, to, one of the most prominent families in the country. She had this, she was the first lady, and she was a very unusual first lady. She was her husband's his legs, his eyes, his ears. She went the places that he could not go. And she was very much his conscience in a lot of ways. But she was continually reaching out and learning from people whose experience was not her own. So I know, so the more I learned of that, the more I began to realize that, oh, it's very in character for her to have reached out to this young woman who was, this coming from the Soviet Union, probably feeling very uncomfortable in this very strange country, in the public eye where she is not used to being, and making this girl feel at home. And so I thought, and Mila writes quite a bit about her conversations with Eleanor, and like they talked about fashion, they talked about movies, they talked about civil rights. Mila was really appalled by segregation, which she saw in the United States. And it's like they talked about so much, and I tried to give those conversations as much weight as in the novel as they had in Mila's memory. And one of the things I really loved was that, and I knew from the beginning, like, okay, this will be my very last scene, is that, Eleanor and Mila had a chance to meet about 15 years later when, as a widow, Eleanor came to the United States, or came to the USSR on a goodwill tour of her own. And, she was shown around all over the place, and she got a chance to meet Mila again. And apparently things were kind of awkward at first, everybody's, everybody's, bodyguards and KGB agents are standing around getting in the way. But finally, they shoot everybody out, and they had tea in, Mila's apartment in Moscow. And they apparently just, absolutely fell into each other's arms and had old home week. And, I was caught up. And I just thought, okay, that's going to be the very last scene in this book. That will be the epilogue. That's the perfect place to finish it.
You gained all that, you found out all these facts in her notes? Is that where you got
it? It was in Mila's memoir that had the most information about the time between them. I mean, but a lot of the scenes that I dramatized for the book came from Mila's memoir, where she described them. Like, she described that, they first met at like the White House, a White House welcome breakfast that got a little bit tense, but that then they started hitting it off after that. She recalls Eleanor drove her to her very first Washington, D.C. dinner party in her own car, and she said the First Lady drove like a maniac and left the Secret Service behind. And there was a whole scene where she was invited to the Roosevelt Estate in upstate New York, and she fell out of a canoe into the water and squelched up into the house. And Eleanor did the mom thing of like, get in here, young lady, you will catch your death of cold. And she's sitting there wrapped in towels as Eleanor is hemming a pair of her own pajamas for Mila to put on while her clothes dry, and she had to hem them because Mila was a little thing and Eleanor was nearly 6 feet tall. And they chatted for so long in the bedroom with the First Lady stitching that FDR apparently had to come find them and figure out why his wife wasn't at lunch. So, and then also true that Eleanor watched her, escorted her around for part of her as a guide for part of her goodwill tour across the U.S. And they had a lot of time in the presidential limousine, talking about all kinds of things. So a lot of these scenes came right from the memoir, and I really enjoyed being able to dramatize them.
Was it very different writing about the combat scenes versus the relationship with the friendship?
Well, it certainly is it was a shift, the first half of the book is rather battle heavy because that's when Mila's fighting happens. And then, the second half or third of the book, it's a different kind of fight when she was on the goodwill tour and had a lot of, had a different kind of job to do. So I always wonder, she always wanted to go back, and she did not end up going back to the front after she returned from the goodwill tour because they determined that she would be more use to this Red Army as an instructor, and that it would be too dangerous to let her go back out to the field because if she was killed, it would then be a big propaganda coup for the Germans.
Was she happy doing that?
I think she was not really. She wanted to go back to the fight, but she, resigned herself to it, and she did. She trained a lot of young snipers, so I think I'm rather glad, honestly, she didn't go back, because if she'd gone back, she almost undoubtedly would have been killed. There were approximately 2,000 female snipers who served in the Red Army during World War II, and only about 25% of them survived. So this was definitely a very dangerous job.
Very. So, I thought it was so interesting with the reporters they asked her, when you talk about fashion and makeup, they asked her about her clothes and her underwear. I said to my, would they ever ask these questions to a guy who was a sniper?
No, it would not.
And are things any different today is the question.
Well, yeah, I remember thinking, I remember thinking that exact same thing, that, Mila was really floored that she got asked these idiotic questions, like what's her makeup routine? And, like, does she wear lipstick at the front? And, someone saying, like, your uniform isn't very flattering. Your skirt makes you look fat. And she was just like, really? Really? This is what you want to know? But yet at the same time, I remember when the Avengers came out, and like all the actors who were on the event in the Avengers are going, doing all this press junket stuff, and like all the guys are being asked, it's like, okay, so what was your motivation? How did you, get into the mind of this character? Like, what was it like doing those fight scenes, the stunt scenes? And then, Scarlett Johansson is asked, what kind of underwear do you wear under the cat suit as Black Widow? It's like, and what are your diet tips for being able to fit into that jumpsuit? And she's just like, really? I get like the rabbit food question, and the guys all get the method acting questions. I mean, so really, I'm not sure that anything is advanced very far from the days of Ludmila Pavlichenko being asked about her makeup routine on the front line.
Sad state of affairs about that. So the novel explores courage and the cost of war. Can you talk about that a little?
Well, it is something that I remain fascinated by, because my husband is 20 years in the active duty Navy. And so he's been deployed several times. I have a lot of friends who are either military or ex-military through him, and a number of those are women. So it's one of those things where I am very well acquainted with things like combat fatigue and PTSD, and what is the weight and the sacrifice and the cost for going to a war zone and then having to come home. And that is something that I have wanted to explore, and I keep exploring through most of my books, in one way or another, the ones at least that are talking about war. But if this one, especially, Mila's experience as a combat veteran, she undoubtedly had PTSD, and she undoubtedly, they said, she did have nightmares. She struggled with the weight of the war and the cost of it for the rest of her life, war wounds, both physical and mental and emotional. And this is something that is not still, it's more talked about now. It was not as much, but it is more talked about now, but still probably not enough, what the cost is. And so I did want to explore very much through her. It's like, all right, she was a hero, she was a war heroine, but what did that cost her? And what did it cost her family?
Could you talk about the assassination plots? I know the Nazis, they did target prominent Soviet snipers. Can you talk about what was true and not true in that whole scenario?
Well, I did make up a presidential assassination plot, which is mounted against FDR in the final days of Mila's Goodwill tour. And that is fictional, but it is drawn from two actual plots. One of those was the time that FDR was shot at early in his presidency, and when he was riding in an open-topped car in Florida. And the shot missed him, but it hit the mayor of Chicago, who was riding along at his side, and the mayor of Chicago died. So FDR was shot at more, and possibly even more than once during his career. The second plot was known as the business plot, and you can look this up, but it was not well known at the time. And it was that there was literally a plot to, among some of the most powerful names in American industry, among the back corridors of power, and among a series of very powerful behind-the-scenes players, that they were going to oust Roosevelt from power and replace him with a military dictator. And this was motivated by a number of powerful and very rich men from the back corridors of power who were not fans of Roosevelt's New Deal, were not fans of getting involved in the war in Europe, and they wanted to oust him from the presidency illegally. The reason they did not is that Roosevelt found out about this, and the entire plan was more or less handled quietly behind the scenes, and the players in question were probably told in a very no uncertain terms if this plot had failed, then they had better pack up any ideas that they had along these lines. So basically, the whole thing was handled in committee, out of sight. But the fact is that there were very powerful men who wanted Roosevelt gone, and they were willing to try force to enact that goal. So knowing that, I decided, well, who's to say that maybe someone couldn't have thought of hiring a assassin to get the job done. And if you were going to assassinate a president, wouldn't it make sense to pin the whole thing on a visiting female sniper who just happens to be in town to take the rap? So that was part of the reason why I decided, okay, I'm going to have this happen. And the fact is that presidents do get shot at it. It doesn't always make the news. If it doesn't hit and the bullet misses, it doesn't always necessarily make the news. So I decided that can be what happens here. And it also allowed me to dramatize something very odd that I found in Mila's memoir, which was that she was pursued on her Goodwill tour by an American millionaire who apparently fell in love with her listening to her speak. And I don't know, like he literally saw this young Ukrainian female sniper and heard her talk about, please, about fighting the Nazis on the Eastern Front, and thought perfect wife material, because he started following her from stop to stop on her tour. And he ended up proposing marriage to her. She was completely gobsmacked and was like, no, absolutely not. Are you out of your mind? But he proposed marriage to her. And then, even though she said no, he gave her a present. And that present was a set of diamonds. It was a necklace, a ring, brooch, earrings, a set of diamonds, and with a note that said, "We will meet again." And the thing is, they never did meet again because she left America very shortly after that, and she never came back. And so she never saw this guy again. But I thought that is just so gloriously bizarre that I can't ignore that. Like, "We will meet again" could also be seen as a threat if in the right way. So it allowed me to dramatize who is this man who supposedly proposed to her and like gave her diamonds, and why. And I tangled that up with the made up assassination plot. But there was really a man who gave her diamonds and a note that said, "We'll meet again," and apparently meant it. And I just thought that was just too good to not make some hay out of.
So how many characters were actually real characters? I mean, it's the Roosevelts, Franklin and Eleanor, Mila. Who else in the book is based on a real person?
Almost everyone. The Roosevelts are real. The other members of her deputation are real. Alexei Pavlichenko and her son Slava are real. Her parents. I think I fictionalized maybe one of her friends, but her friend named Lena, who was a medic, is real. She had another friend who, like the old man named Vartanoff, who was a ranger and a guide. He was real. Her partner, Fyodor Sadiq, and the named members of her team were real. Now, Kostya is, or the two men in her life, Leonya, who is she regarded as her second husband, he was very real. Kostya, who was her last husband, who I fictionalized him a bit more because we know almost nothing about him except his name. So I made up I had his name, but we didn't know who he was or how they met. And so therefore I made up a background for him and I put him on the team with her. So he is more fictionalized since we didn't know what his background was like. But I did, but he was technically real as well. So almost every figure in this book is at least partially based on someone true.
I loved your notes at the end too. It really explains things. It was excellent. So the title, The Diamond Eye, was this the original title? And beyond the sniper reference, did it have any other deeper meaning? You just mentioned diamond, the necklace. Was there any other meanings that you went with this title?
No, I had that title in mind pretty much from the beginning, which is a little rare for me. I'm terrible at titles usually, and the title ends up being some kind of collaboration between my editor and my agent and me when we finally figure something out. But this one had the title from the beginning, and I just really liked it because it was, diamond being not only you know, it has brilliance, it has clarity, like, but, you know, which is good pairing with an eye for a sniper's eye, but also, you know, it's hard, it's, you cannot destroy it. And it went in nicely too with the idea of, you know, coal, when, you know, put under pressure can become a diamond, you know, and, you know, this is also about very much what happens to people when they are put under pressure. And for Mila, she is put under an absolutely insane amount of pressure, and she does turn into a diamond, but it is the effort not to become as hard as one as well. And so the whole idea of what you become under pressure, it really became one of the driving themes in this book. And a diamond is, you know, one of the top symbols of something that is created by tremendous amounts of pressure.
Do you pick the title, not your agent or anybody, or do you do this together as a collaboration, or?
It's usually a collaboration of some kind, like, well, like quite often for titles, you know, either I might just do this myself, or I'll enlist a bunch of writer friends. I start like literally throwing combinations of words at the page, you know, until I try to figure out if any of them stick. And then then I'll, you know, pick the top ones, you know, and then I'll send to my editor or my agent, and then they'll weigh in, and then maybe we'll find something else that works even better, or maybe one of the ones on the list will pop right off the list and everyone likes that one. Yeah, I rarely know in advance, like exactly what the title will be.
Does your husband read all the books? Does he get into all the books, or?
Yes, he always does. He's one of my readers usually once I have a reasonably edited draft, but he's very good for, he's got good feedback, and he's generally the one who's always telling me to go deeper and go harder and make it hurt worse. He's like, no, you can make this more, hit even harder. You can make this hurt worse. It's like he always wants me to go further. For this book especially, he was really good because he's always good whenever I have battle scenes, whenever it's anything to do with, you know, cost of war, which he knows very well. But he was good especially for the shooting stuff, because he's maintained expert marksman rank for his entire career and is an excellent shot. So he was able to help me with a lot of the gun stuff, since I do know how to shoot a gun, but I've certainly never shot one the way shot one of the caliber that Mila did. And so he was very useful for that, and good for anything that is war related, since it's something that he definitely knows firsthand better than I do.
That was very helpful.
Oh, yes.
Is the book at all biographical? I know it's, you know, it's based on fact, but is there anything autobiographical in it?
Not this. I mean, I suppose everything has a little bit of me in it, or a little bit of my own experience in it, because you can't avoid that entirely. But I would say this book is more is the closest I've really come to doing biographical historical fiction. Mostly when I write my historical fiction, my characters are either fictionalized, or they are, you know, based on real people, but fictionalized from that. And I rarely use actual historical figures as my viewpoint heroines. But for this, you know, Lyudmila Pavlichenko was a real woman, and I used the real woman as my character and not a fictionalized version of her.
She would be an interesting person to meet.
She would. I am always, you know, I'm quite often asked, like, if you could have dinner with any of your characters, who would you choose? And I would love to meet her, because the reason I would really for that is because I would want to know, did I get you right? You know, did I get it right? Because I am very much aware that my version of Lyudmila Pavlichenko is just that. It's my version. I wrote a version of her because I wrote a novel, and I'm aware that maybe she's different from how I envisioned her, but I don't know. So I would have loved to meet her, just so I could know the real woman and want to know, like, did my version come anywhere near the truth?
Yeah, that would be very interesting. So is there anything that didn't make it into the book that you wish you had made it into the book?
No, this one actually came together pretty tightly, and the format pretty well suggested itself. So pretty much everything that made it in, I got everything into it that I wanted to for this one. Not too much ended up on the cutting room floor.
I have a question, and I was just curious. So throughout the book, you talk about the Hitlerites. And why did you not use the word, say, Nazis? Like, why did they use the term Hitlerites in the book? I couldn't figure that out.
Oh, that was a very common thing with the Soviets, and they preferred that term because they scorned the idea that National Socialism, which is where we get the term Nazi, they scorned the idea that National Socialism had anything at all to do with real socialism. Because, communism is, the offshoot of socialism, but they called specifically called the Germans Hitlerites because they were trying to make a point that what Germany had was a cult of personality that follows a single dictator. They do not have anything that is actually socialism. And so that's why they used the term Hitlerites, because they wanted to make the point that, like, you are just, cult leaders. You're a cult that follows a cult leader. You're not anything to do with actual socialism. So that was quite common among the Russians when they were referring to the German enemy. I see I have a question on the side, which is when and where did Mila die? She died I think she was in her 70s or thereabouts. I can't remember the exact date at this point. She had died of some kind of heart complication. She definitely had health problems by that point, complicated by problems with alcohol and also problems with her from old war wounds. So she definitely had some health issues later in life, but she died surrounded by her family and in the arms of her son. And she was quite close. She never had any more children. She only had the one son, but she lived with, she also was described as being a very doting grandmother. She had a single granddaughter and was very close to her, and was also apparently quite close to her daughter-in-law, because her daughter-in-law finished her memoir, which was not quite done, and made sure it was made ready for publication.
It's very easy to be a doting grandma. So what are you working on next?
I am working on a book which is it's another dual timeline historical, and it is pre and post World War I. And it is about the suffragette movement in the UK. The fight, and very literally the battle that the women were fighting for the right to vote. I've wanted to write about suffragettes for a very long time. And so I'm really, really excited to be able to do this, to tackle this history.
When is that book being published?
Well, I'm turning it in this summer, so probably coming out sometime next summer. Right now it is the title, The Woman on the Mountain.
Okay, I look forward to reading that. I'm done with my questions. If anybody in the audience would like to ask any questions, I know people have put it in already, but is there any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask also if you'd like.
I also have the chat pulled up on the side, so if it's easier for you to put your question in the chat, I will see it. No questions, really.
Okay. Well, thank
Wait,
you.
can I ask one? Can I ask one?
Of course.
I actually, I'm such a big fan of your books. I've read so many of them, and I actually, I seek you out as an author. But I love the characters that are surrounding your main character and how they really make such a full and really, very engrossing story. So you are a wonderful storyteller, but I love that especially. It's really good.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, I always like I want to make sure also always that, my books that do have, good surrounding characters, because you don't ever want your heroine to have sort of a main character syndrome where everybody just stands around watching the main character like they know they're in a book. Everyone is the hero of their own story. And I always try to keep that in mind when I've got secondary characters. All right, I've got a few more questions down here. Can you walk us through your research process or what you choose to write about? Well, I did talk about this a little bit earlier, but what I choose, my moment of inspiration is almost always when I have either a woman or a group of women who have done something extraordinary, and I want to know more. And I go down the rabbit hole and I find out more, and my jaw is on the floor by whatever it is they've done, whether it's women spies or women code breakers or women pilots or, women activists. And generally at some point in my big reaction of, oh my God, this is amazing, these women are amazing, I'll start thinking, okay, this sounds like the hook for a book. So that's almost always my point of inspiration. And then the research is just reading everything I can get my hands on about that woman or those women and their time period, and as much as I can to fill in that time period and see where I can layer the fictional elements on top of the historical elements in order to have a good story. So that's how I do it. It always is some months, anywhere from like 2 to 6 of just reading and researching before I put anything on paper. That's also the point when I'm doing a lot of outlining as well, just so that I can get as good a grip as I can on the story I'm going to tell before I start drafting it. So that's usually my process. Someone else is asking, you must have been approached to turn your stories into film. Yes, I've had a number of my books optioned. Nothing has made it past the option process at this point, and that's really common. The Hollywood is a very slow process, and when you get something optioned, it's not a guarantee. In fact, mostly things are going to die on the vine, and then the option runs out and nothing has really happened. So it's fun when it happens, and it's definitely fun to think about. Fun to fantasize about, but I don't ever hang my hat on like, oh, this is absolutely going to happen. Now, I'm hoping maybe at some point, yes, it will be awesome. And I do hope it does happen at some point. Okay, let's see what else. Tell me more about her son and grandchildren. Yeah, she has just the one son and the one grandchild. The grandchild is the granddaughter is an artist who's living in Greece, I believe, and she has been interviewed from time to time. I remember she was interviewed about her grandmother when there was a movie made in Ukraine, and it's subtitled in Ukrainian. It's called Battle for Sevastopol, and it is about Mila Pavlichenko. You can find that, I think, on YouTube. It's quite watchable. They do take quite a few liberties with her background and her history, but it's still quite watchable. She was asked, about the movie at that point, and asked like, well, is this anything like my grandmother? She's like, not so much. I remember my grandmother was very warm, and she was warm and nurturing, and they made her very cool in the movie. But so I have never interviewed her or talked to her. It's one of those things that could be a little dicey when you're, you're trying to do a fictional version of somebody's real family member. So it's, that can be definitely a little nerve-wracking for sure. So, and again, given she lives in Greece and, this was done during COVID, reaching out would have been definitely a difficult job. Any other questions?
And they didn't reach out to you to ask you about your story that you wrote?
Nope, I've never had anyone reach out to me. I kind of am okay with that, because I would always be worried that someone would say, how dare you have written about my family member? And then I'd be like, I'm sorry, but she's a war heroine. She is a historical figure. I mean, she's a public figure. I hope you didn't hate it, but sorry. Anyway, do you have any favorite authors? Oh, I have so many. I can't possibly narrow it down. I wish I could. What books have you read lately that you've really loved? Melissa Albert's The Children was really great. I've really been talking that one up. And I'm reading Lion Women of Tehran right now, which I'm really
that's great.
enjoying. Yeah, I love that author. She is just fantastic. I've read both of her other books, so this is the last book of hers that I have not read yet.
We did an interview with her. You can watch the interview.
Marjan Kamali. Oh yeah, she's wonderful. I've met her. I met her on my last book tour, and I totally fangirled. It was amazing. So that's some of the stuff that I've been reading lately. But anyway, we're right at 3 o'clock, so I'm sorry if I have to jump off. I hope I got to most everybody's questions. I think I may have missed a few, but so I'm sorry about that. But
thank you so much. This was terrific.
Now, thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for coming on in. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and are reading something amazing.
I can't wait to read the next one.
Oh, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.